this will be clipped on somewhere that we're going. There's going to be a cable that's going to be attached there and going around back.
Okay.
This one is-
I'm at ISO 5000.
Hi, I'm getting wired up. This is where we're going to start the pool on how long it's going to take me to kill myself on this. 5 minutes?
10.
Oh, you're an optimist.
2.5.
I'm not sure how bad it'll be.
25.
Let me pull up the right one of these.
That'd be good.
I have the right script.
All you gotta do is stand in front of the microphone and salute.
I have a slate because if people haven't realized, there's a couple of cameras going on here. Does everyone from Funimation want to wave their hands? I found that out about 15 minutes ago. Okay, let's just be clear. No pressure, and I had somebody fixing a dress until 4:30 in my room because I brought a sewing machine. So, we're all with me on this? We're all good. Okay. I will begin then if we are good. I don't know how to operate this thing.
Yeah, that works.
Hi, my name is Rachel Stacy. I normally go by Alex at conventions just because, but my actual name is Rachel Stacy, and I have the most useless degree in the entire universe. I graduated with a degree in history and philosophy of science. That's one major, not two that might be quasi-useful, from the University of Pittsburgh. So, when I watch anime like Full Metal Alchemist, I'm not going, ooh, pretty, ooh, awesome. My brain does this weird thing like, you know what? Yeah, I think I read something about that when I was reading those notes on Newton. Which isn't normal. And I made the mistake of saying these words in my friend Liz and Paula's house once. And they're like, oh, you should do a pair. I'm like, no one would come to that.
Again, you have
Told ya,
in
told
the
ya.
title.
Told ya.
So therefore, I didn't think anyone was going to come to this, but I'm like, okay, I'm going to do it right anyway. So, welcome to the historical alchemy in Full Metal Alchemist. Now, because we only have so much time and it's a huge series, we are not doing a lot of spoilers. So if you have not already watched it, we are sticking to the mangaverse only. So we're very accurate to Brotherhood. We are not going past volume 3. Except in the most vague of references that if you don't know what happens towards the end, it will not spoil anything for you. It will possibly go, moment at the end, but I'm not spoiling the end, I promise. Okay. The historical alchemy in Full Metal Alchemist.
You want to maybe what? Hey.
Yay! Okay, alchemy. If we look up anything about alchemy and look at the most common sources, Wikipedia, Google, my chemistry book, whatever, alchemy was, at best, some proto-science from which this man, Robert Boyle, delivered us from and thrust us forth into scientific understanding of the nature of matter. That would be really awesome if it were true. But why would that be? Why would this one man have taken alchemy and turned it into chemistry? Did math suddenly change from ancient times? Does everyone remember the Pythagorean theorem in math? You kind of had to learn that. That wasn't really, post this guy. That was ancient. Did any other science suddenly change with regard to what came before? No. Did physics? Oh, I remember in physics, you have to learn the ancient physics and how eventually it was applied and people just changed. That's how everything works. Even Darwin's arguable paradigm shift, I hate the word paradigm shift, by the way, of evolution was founded on the work before him, so why would chemistry be any different? Is alchemy that much more exotic sounding than algebra or alkaline to anyone when you think about it? All the al is just part of the Arabic particle to form a noun into the definite. Thus, the best approximation for what alchemy means would simply be the study of how things are cast together. That sounds kind of like chemistry, doesn't it? It's just how things are combined. How things are combined. Isn't that alchemy? It's the same thing. It's 100% continuous from ancient times to now. It's just changed a bit. So everyone's like, well, chemistry has laws. And with Boyle's law front and center. It's on page 25 of my high school chemistry book, by the way, just in case anyone wants to look at a really old chemistry book. Okay, so does chemistry have laws? I mean, does alchemy have laws? Or more importantly, does Alchemy and Full Metal Alchemist have laws? Oh, flip to the next one. Of course we do. Chapter 1, and we have our first law as the characters are explaining alchemy, so the reader knows what's going on with this important aspect of the world in Full Metal Alchemist. The first law is the conservation of mass. That doesn't sound that exotic, does it?
Nope.
Not really. Because this is really strange. I think the next slide, oh no, back one slide. Do it back. I forgot I managed to get the picture on there. So here we have our beloved brothers of alchemy talking about something that is such a science theory. I mean, I guess the two big concepts are the law of conservation of mass and the law of natural providence. Okay, that last one sounds a little bit more exotic, but not the first. Okay, slide 5. Conservation of mass. Is that a current law? I mean, here we have Boyle. That's mercury oxide there, and he figured out that if you separate it into mercury and oxygen, its component atoms, you have the same amount of stuff. You have your conservation of mass. That is what evidently thrust us into chemistry now instead of alchemy. Is it any different than what's next to it? Which is Empedocles, I believe. For it is impossible for anything to come to be from what is not, and it cannot be brought about or heard of what is that should be utterly destroyed. We can't destroy things. They always exist. We can just change them. That's alchemy. That's also chemistry. So nothing new there. Okay, next slide. Okay, so in alchemy we have 4 elements. Earth, air, water, fire. This is starting to sound pretty familiar, isn't it? Everybody needs that picture, right? Okay, so next slide. So our first law so far seems to come from very early Greek philosophy. So on to law number 2. This is the one that feels more magical. Slide 8. Okay. Slide 8? This is law, yes. Okay. This one feels at first the most magical in a way, the law of natural providence. This doesn't at first glance seem to have a direct correlation to anything in chemistry, except it does. As Al so nicely explains, after reading Al's line, it's really twisty, a substance can only be created from the same type of substance. For example, if something's mostly water, you can only use it to make other things with the attribute of water. Or if something's only mercury and oxygen, if you do something to it, you only get mercury and oxygen. Is that really that much different? No. So Al explains, and we realize that this goes right back to Empedocles, which was our man on the earlier part, where he came up with 4 elements. He didn't call them elements yet. Empedocles was a little bit farther back than elements, but it's what we call the elements now. So we have equivalent exchange, which is essentially the building blocks of everything are the 4 elements, or the 3 principles. We'll hit up principles later because they're a little bit more difficult than the elements, and we're all familiar with the elements. So essentially what we have is a handful of Legos that can be arranged. And you're not destroying Legos when you rip apart your Death Star and you build your TIE fighter. And your Legos are your Legos, they're your building blocks. It's just how the elements work in alchemy, in chemistry, everything. So how alchemy actually works in Fullmetal Alchemist is a 3-step process. Yay. You know, he really is the helpful one for being the younger brother. Alchemy is just the reconstruction of matter into new forms based on knowledge of natural laws. Not magic, laws. We already know the main natural laws, and this is where we learn the down and dirty of how it's done. The circles and symbols in Fullmetal Alchemist are just trappings. The ancient symbols that help the process, but as we learn, they aren't truly needed. They're just a guide. The essential steps are simply analysis. This is where we determine what elements or principles the object about to be transmuted is composed of. This is what we learn what it is. We learn what Legos it has, basically. Deconstruction. We break down our item in a flash of energy into its most basic component parts. We rip the Legos apart. Reconstruction. This is where we reassemble those pieces back into what we wish to have. Thus, when we break a radio, we gather the pieces so we have the raw materials. Then for the actual alchemy, we reconstruct it and have our working radio again. This is why the reason our first glimpse of alchemy in the manga is essentially how the universe works on its most basic level, and so far it is very ancient Western alchemy. Here we go. Okay, so we break the radio. We gather up the pieces, we throw them in with all the trappings and the symbols. There's a huge bunch of energy that is conveyed through there, and boom, we have a radio. That's where it gets weird, though. How did we get a radio? Did the symbols tell us what a radio was? Do you think there's enough instructions for how a radio should be based upon those couple little lines? It doesn't seem like it. I mean, yeah, we see complex transmutations that have a lot more symbols, but it's never enough to explain how.
Is it tied to the knowledge of the alchemist?
Maybe, maybe not. But it's not, but the important part here is it's not the broken pieces of the radio that's put back together. He didn't take the radio and glue it back together. The component parts of that radio were completely destroyed in that second stage. So there was no radio in that second stage. There was just earth, which is what radios are composed of, is just earth type things. Radio, broken. Completely no radio, just earth. Fully functional radio. And that's important. But that gets left for later. Okay, now back to the 3 principles. Okay, do I have anything for the 3 principles? Okay, the 3 principles are never really covered, at least in the beginning of Fullmetal Alchemist, and I only got through rereading the manga so far. I don't think that they really ever cover the 3 principles. The 3 principles are not from ancient alchemy. They're from before the entire science happened, just a little bit when everything ancient was being very romanticized. But they're very important to what we see in Fullmetal Alchemist. The first of the principles is sulfur. It is the harmony of air and fire elements. That way it's movable, it's hot, it diffuses, so it has the properties of air and fire. So it is volatile. And in modern alchemy, it's considered to be the volatile essential oils. So it's like a plant's unique flavor. And here's the important part. It's about living things, which makes it different from the elements. The elements are more or less dead. They're water, they're earthy things, they're the air, they're fire. They aren't growing and living. The principles are growing and living things. And the principles are different than the chemicals. So the principle of sulfur is different than the chemical of sulfur. The principle is the essential oils of the plant. Chemical sulfur is a horrible chemical that smells really strong and tends to permeate the surrounding air and stink like rotten eggs. It ignites easily, therefore the relationship to fire. but they're different things. Our second one is mercury. And mercury is supposed to be composed of water and the air elements. So it's the mediator between the volatile and the ethereal elements, which is where we get a little hocus-pocusy with the principles. In traditional Greek mythology, Mercury was the messenger of the gods, and was in constant movement above and below. So it's something that is in constant flux. And within plants, it's reflected as the alcohols in the plants. And so when you take any plant and ferment it, which is a way killing it, you are putting it into an alcohol. So you are taking the spirit of the plant and turning it into alcohol, and that's where we get spirits from, because they're the spirit of the plant. And chemical mercury is a little bit different, because chemical mercury is just a thing. It's not alive like the mercury of a plant would be. Salt, same thing, except this time it's it's the combining of the previous two. So salt is just the material matrix of the plant. So in a way, it's almost like it's organic alchemy that we have now combined with traditional alchemy. Because the traditional alchemy, it didn't cover living things well. And as we see in Full Metal Alchemist, living things are a lot more difficult and sad and traumatizing and make us cry at night. So now you're thinking, is she just reading into this? Or is there really supposed to be ties to actual alchemy in Full Metal Alchemist? There is one real person that is mentioned by name in Full Metal Alchemist. And his name is Flamel. And I believe we have a slide of him. Yep. Flamel, Nicholas Flamel, is actually mentioned by name. And not only that, his symbol is used everywhere. He is the only actual human from our world that is mentioned in full name by anyone in that series, let alone by our main characters. And that there is his symbol. Now, Flamel actually, there are legendary accounts of this man. There's only so much known about the real Nicholas Flamel. But after he died, suddenly all these legendary accounts started to happen. Or after he died, all of these legendary accounts started. The essence of his reputation are the claims that he succeeded in the two goals of alchemy. That he made the Philosopher's Stone, which turns base metals into gold, of course. But that's not what the Philosopher's Stone does in Full Metal Alchemist, and we all know that. That's just normal alchemy. But he made the Philosopher's Stone, and then he achieved immortality through the elixir of life. Now, you'd think that if somebody actually did that, we'd know a lot more about him in our chemistry books, news, president of the world or something. But in an alchemical book published in Paris in 1612, Livre des figures hiéroglyphiques, my French is not good, which is attributed to Flamel, but nobody knows if he actually wrote it. But according to him, he made it his life's work to understand the text of some mysterious books. And with this knowledge, over the next few years, he and his wife allegedly decoded enough of the book to successfully replicate its recipes for the Philosopher's Stone. First, they produced silver, evidently in 1382, and then gold. Very, very accurate date on the silver. If there's accurate dates from the 1300s, tend not to believe them. But the validity of this story was questioned in 1761, which is only a few years after that book came out. And notice it's 400 years after this man supposedly lived. So you can tell how accurate this book probably was. Because, manuscripts sitting around for 400 years. But other writers have defended the account of Flamel's life. And whatever really happened with Flamel, we know he existed, and we know that people afterwards really believed it. People we would respect to this day really believed Flamel was able to do these things. Newton believed Flamel was able to do these things. Recently, I think it's like 400, 500 pages of Newton's work have been discovered that he never got published, that are 100% dealing with alchemy and dealing with Flamel. they did analysis of Newton's hair. This is really not important. They did analysis of Newton's hair for the lead content in it from all of his alchemy experiences. The man should have died long before he did. But it had just built up so long that evidently, as he just got crazier and crazier, there was just more and more lead. So Flamel has achieved legendary status within the circles of alchemy by the mid-1700s. And at that point, things were already starting to get a little bit mixed up. Isaac Newton referred to him as the catechus. The dragon referred to the catechus as the dragon of Flamel. And before we get to the Philosopher's Stone, I want to do a real quick note on some imagery. Can we go to the next one? There's Flamel. Hi, Flamel.
Hi, Nick.
Next one. Okay, we have two symbols that we both probably have all seen if we've been near an ambulance, a hospital, or anything. Now, both of these symbols are associated with medicine. They didn't used to be associated with medicine, both of them. The Asclepius there has been associated since ancient times with medicine. And it was originally pictured with our Greek from earlier that I now can no longer say the name of. And so there are ancient sculptures where we see that with him. And through the ages, we keep on seeing the single snake around the pole being associated with medicine. The other one is the catechus, which is what now has become associated with Flamel, but was never originally associated with him. It's associated with Hermes and Hermeticism and all of that stuff, and most importantly, the ability to bring back the dead, which is something that Flamel has been attributed with being able to do. And we all know from the very basics of the origin story of our favorite alchemist that that's very important to them. Okay, next. Okay, so that brings us back to the Philosopher's Stone. Okay. So what we have learned is that, I didn't get the clip, but there's a part where Ed is talking about how cheap the human body is and how a child's allowance could purchase the materials in a human body. What we learn instantaneously is a human is not its components. It is not just the fire, any of the elements. You can buy all those chemicals and you don't have a human body, or otherwise Ed would have his arms, Al would have his body, and we would not have a series. So there's something more. And that's where we get to the soul. The soul is not the elements and it is not the principles. And this goes back to Plato. I fully believe that our author knows this because it is too coincidental for it not to be. I'm going to spare you the Plato quote that I cut out. Essentially, it is, it's not that long, I already cut it like 3 times. Thus he spake. Plato wrote in dialogue, so he always has somebody talking to somebody else. He just didn't write things straightforward. I don't know why he did it that way. Thus he spake, and once more into the cup in which he had previously mingled the soul of the universe. The he he's referring to here is the demiurgos, as he referred to it as. A demiurgos is the prime mover, or something that you could translate as the truth. It's just too much of a coincidence. So he previously mingled the soul of the universe. He poured the remains of the elements and mingled in much the same manner. They were not, however, pure anymore because they had been mingled with the elements. They were diluted. And having made it, he divided the whole mixture into souls, equal in number to the stars, and assigned each soul to a star. And having there placed them in a chariot, he showed them the nature of the universe and declared to them the laws of destiny, according to which their first birth would be one and all for the same, no one would suffer disadvantage, yada, yada, yada. And thus they became man. So souls were never part of what was supposed to be touched by alchemy. It was never the principles, it was never the elements, it was something different. Okay. Slide. Okay, yeah, that's what we just covered. Next one. Okay, so this is how Plato saw the world. The mind and the body there, the horses, they're alchemy. They're the principles of mind, over there is the principles, and up here is body. Those are the elements. So we have principles and body being guided by the soul, which is not part of alchemy. The human is different than the things that can be conveyed with alchemy. Okay, next is slide 19. And now for the full circle, the radio. How did Ed make a radio? The best answer I have found is in Plato. Plato had something called the forms. He based this new radio off of the form of, slight spoiler, the truth of a radio. We know how important the truth is in Fullmetal Alchemist if we've made it very far. The concept of the truth actually starts right in chapter 1. So, I mean, of course this is just theory, but it makes perfect sense. The idea of another realm where the true forms of things exist doesn't seem that far out of Fullmetal Alchemist, does it, people that have made it to the back? So just something to think about. So if this is really true, it almost seems that the understanding of alchemy in the Western area of the understanding of alchemy in our main area, the state alchemy, not touching any of the other alchemy, is actually grounded on very old Greek and Middle Ages alchemy. And thus the forms of Plato are truly what are the guideposts that the alchemist channels through those symbols, through everything, and that's how we get our radio, because it's based upon the form of a radio. And I really hope that made sense. Here we are. Hi, people. And so that is my best theory on how alchemy in the State Alchemist version works. Do people have questions? Because I know that did not 100% make sense for people that did not have a background in philosophy. I tried my best. Yes?
You mean it's like the natural state of the radio, like what the materials remember being?
What the Okay. For Plato, there are true things. Like this table, this is a table. This is an imperfect table. This is not the perfect table. There is someplace in another realm a table that is the perfect table. It conveys everything about tables. It is the form of table. It is called the form, and it is exactly what all other tables are based upon. That chair is based upon the form of a chair. The one next to it, it's not exactly the same. They're both based on that same form of chair, someplace else, someplace where there is truth, someplace we as imperfect physical beings cannot be.
Beyond the gate.
Beyond the gate. Paula.
So there is an ideal chair, as it were, somewhere, which all material chairs are like reflections or copies?
There is 100% an ideal chair. That is the true chair, and what all chairs, if they could aspire to be anything, are aspiring to be that perfect chair. Yes.
Now, you're saying there's this perfect form of table, chair, Is it possible that something of the alchemist, their personality puts a personal flair on the chair? Yes.
You could modify the form of the chair. If you are a chair builder or an alchemist, you could make it seem a little bit different.
My example would be, I want to mix genres here a little bit, but in Harry Potter, conjure a chair. McGonagall is a very square chair. Dumbledore, very fluffy chair.
That would be how the chair is reflected through the imperfect channeler. Flamel is also mentioned there.
Yeah,
Flamel is very famously mentioned in Harry Potter as well.
There's a whole series by Michael Scott of Nicholas Flamel that I've read. So I'm kind of familiar with Flamel.
Red shirt.
So if there's a perfect form of a radio, why doesn't, whenever you like transmutate or whatever, any radio goes to, why do all transmutated radios look the same if they're the perfect form that's based on?
Because we live in an imperfect world, and the alchemist is imperfect as well. The alchemist is human. He's mortal. He's never truly seen the form, so he's never seen the truth exactly. So do you see how that can apply? So he is trying to make a perfect radio, but he can't make a perfect radio because he's imperfect in and of himself. I had a question back there with this, actually, way in the back. Can you articulate? Louder.
Okay, so talk about true nature, well, the true nature of things. Is it possible that Alchemist, if you were to discover, like back in Eric's time, you had radio, planes, that stuff. What if they knew trying, if he had the right number of materials, what if he decided to alchemize a jet plane? You could potentially do that on the theory that there is true object you can access it somehow from another dimension.
The true jet plane theoretically would exist in the other realm. The problem is he wouldn't know about a jet plane, so he would have no idea of a form of a jet plane. Like right now, we have an idea of a form of a chair. We have an idea in our mind what chair looks like. So if hoverboard, I don't know what a hoverboard looks like. I saw, movies with hoverboards. I could not transmute a hoverboard, even if the ideal hoverboard existed, because I don't know what one is.
I mean, with that, especially the radio actually work with it, you didn't know that the radio is exposed to a certain number of materials being transmuted.
He doesn't have to. He knows enough so that enough of the true form of the radio is able to come through that massive power that's infused into it to reflect enough of that form to make the radio work.
Would it be independent of time, though?
Hmm?
Would it be technically independent of time?
Yeah, time would have absolutely no... that all happens in an instant.
As far as like things weren't invented yet, shouldn't even take that situation. It wasn't invented yet. No one knew about it. So it's possible to transmit it. But on the other hand, that doesn't necessarily mean never existed first.
People haven't invented it yet. The truth already knows about it. So it essentially the truth and Plato's demiurgos form the place of God. So God already knows about jet planes, about spaceships, about all that stuff. We just don't know it yet. So you're able to transmute the stuff that you have an idea of the form of, but not stuff that you don't yet know the idea of the form of because you just don't have enough knowledge in your imperfect body. You with the sword.
Can I reiterate my earlier point where it comes back to the knowledge of the alchemist?
Mm-hmm.
If a person doesn't know what a radio is, which in that time is pretty unbelievable, they could not transmutate a radio from those parts.
They'd probably transmute something that looks like one kind of because they could kind of see what it was, but it probably wouldn't work if they didn't know enough.
What Edward does is he has all that knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
He's seen the truth.
He has.
He has all that knowledge, and because he's imperfect, and because he's a little bit arrogant.
Did you just call him little? He tends to add a personal flair to everything. Normally his face. Or the curl. So, when I said it goes back to the knowledge of the alchemist, you can tell the elements to go to this ethereal truth, but you have to tell it what it's supposed to look like and what it's supposed to do. You do guide it in a way.
Right, and when Al does it, he's very
By the book.
the thing. If I'm going to mix genres, Aragon. He says the word for radio. He means radio. Al says radio, or Ed says radio, and he means something with my face speaking out of it.
So, they still embody the form and the truth that was seen, but just like an artist, if everybody in here drew a picture of Ed, they'd all look a little different. They'd all be based on Ed, but they'd all be a little different, and every person would not have an exact perfect reproduction, and many people would take artistic license, and there's no reason alchemists cannot take an artistic license with their alchemy either.
As long as you don't go over your mass level.
For Harper? Alright.
Getting away from the ideal and the
Yes.
quintessential chair and the
Yes.
table. Does you have broken radio,
Yes.
reaction?
fixed radio.
Yes.
Where does the energy come from to fix it? Does it come from the alchemist's soul?
Where the energy comes from is kind of wishy-washy. And it's kind of hard to see. I believe it's actually, that the circle is actually channeling energy from the other place where truth is. So it's channeling energy that is not in this world. Thus the energy there does not have to follow any of our conservation laws. It's coming from somewhere else. So alchemy is not a truly closed system. The energy comes from someplace else where it deconstructs it and reconstructs it.
That ties to the first anime gardens theories, it seems like.
So, in another life, I was actually a chemist in college. So when you
I'm
talk,
sorry.
So when you talk about the three principles, the man who discovered the three principles or came up with the idea is Pericles, and he's from the 1400s.
Yes.
So that's something I was thinking about. But also, there's the conservation of energy in science, which is about to answer your question. When you destroy something typically or make it go back to its basic parts, that same energy is still there. So the circle could be taking the energy from the destruction reaction and using it to rebuild the reaction to make it perform.
But we can't do that because there's light, so we lost that energy.
But this isn't the same reality, so you don't
Right.
necessarily have to worry
So
about
that's
that.
why we need to take energy from someplace else. We can't, it's not perfectly a closed system if we look at it scientifically. I'm running out of time.
No,
let me go to is that Twilight? Was that Princess Twilight on your dress in the purple or your skirt in purple? Yes.
There's always energy that's lost.
Okay.
We have to say.
Okay.
Yeah, one thing I will say is that the energy that they use, they explain, like Edward and all of them, they use the earth. Like they use a lot, they use like the tectonic shifts and everything to power the energy so that they travel. Whereas then you've got the Eastern alchemists, which use a different form of energy. So
Okay.
they do explain that there's different.
So they're actually taking, I knew there was energy coming into it that was not part of the original thing. So that makes sense because normally it's down
So that's
there.
where that's why they can do this,
Okay.
because they can access that and not spoiling it, things happen that they
Yes.
other different
That, yes. I think I'm going to get kicked out of here very shortly. Yes, I'm getting kicked out of here very shortly. I want to say thank you. I did not think people were going to show up for this. Thank you, Funimation, for making one of my favorite animes. Can we all thank Funimation for bringing a Full Metal Alchemist to us here in America? And thank you for getting up super early to listen to somebody babble about the philosophy of science to you. So when you go back to school on Tuesday, you can say you learned something.